Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished checking on her last patient of the night shift. The emergency room at St. Mary's General Hospital had been unusually quiet for a Friday evening, but she knew better than to trust the calm. In her 15 years as a registered nurse, she had learned that emergencies never announced themselves with fanfare. At 38 years old, Sarah had seen it all. From heart attacks to car accidents, from screaming children with broken bones to elderly patients taking their final breaths. She had held hands with the dying, celebrated with new mothers, and worked through countless holidays while her own family gathered without her. Yet despite her dedication and expertise, she constantly felt the weight of others' assumptions about her profession. Earlier that evening, during the shift change meeting, Dr. Harrison had made another one of his condescending remarks. "Sarah, could you please make sure the real medical professionals have everything they need before you start with your nursing tasks?" The comment had stung, particularly because she had just finished successfully stabilizing a trauma patient while he was still putting on his scrubs. The hierarchical nature of the hospital environment never ceased to frustrate her. Despite having a master's degree in nursing, advanced certifications in trauma care, and years of experience that often exceeded that of the younger doctors, she was frequently treated as little more than a glorified assistant. The phrase "just a nurse" followed her like a shadow, whispered in medical conferences, implied in administrative meetings, and sometimes stated outright by colleagues who should have known better. Sarah's journey to nursing had been unconventional. Born in a small town in New Mexico, she was the daughter of Maria Martinez, a woman whose own story was far more complex than anyone in the hospital could imagine. Maria had raised Sarah as a single mother, working multiple jobs to ensure her daughter could attend college. What Sarah didn't know, and what her mother had never revealed, was that Maria's past included military service that went far beyond what appeared in any public records. Growing up, Sarah had always been curious about her mother's reluctance to discuss her time in the military. Maria would only say that she had served her country and preferred to focus on the present. The few photographs Sarah had seen showed her mother in standard military fatigues, nothing that suggested anything extraordinary. But there were moments when Maria would demonstrate knowledge or skills that seemed unusual for someone who claimed to have been a simple communications officer. After high school, Sarah had originally planned to study engineering, but a volunteer experience at a local hospital changed her perspective entirely. She discovered that she had a natural ability to connect with patients, to provide comfort during their most vulnerable moments, and to notice subtle changes in their conditions that others might miss. The decision to pursue nursing felt like a calling, even though it meant facing years of financial struggle and academic challenges. Nursing school had been grueling. Sarah worked nights at a local diner to pay for her education, often studying between serving tables and cleaning dishes. Her professors were demanding, and the clinical rotations pushed her to her limits. But she excelled, graduating at the top of her class and earning recognition for her exceptional patient care skills. Still, even with her academic achievements, she found that the professional world continued to undervalue her contributions. At St. Mary's, Sarah had built a reputation among her colleagues as someone who could handle the most difficult cases. She had an intuitive understanding of patient needs and could often identify problems before they became critical. Her calm demeanor under pressure and her ability to coordinate complex care plans made her invaluable to the medical team, yet she remained invisible when it came to recognition or advancement opportunities. The night shift at St. Mary's brought its own unique challenges. The hospital operated with a skeleton crew, and the nurses were expected to manage larger patient loads with minimal support. Sarah had grown accustomed to the responsibility, finding satisfaction in knowing that her vigilance could mean the difference between life and death for her patients. She had prevented medication errors, caught early signs of complications, and provided emotional support to families during their darkest hours. Despite her professional competence, Sarah struggled with the personal cost of her career choice. She had never married, partly because the demanding schedule made relationships difficult, and partly because she had never found someone who understood her commitment to her patients. Her social life consisted mainly of brief encounters with colleagues between shifts and occasional visits with her mother, who had moved to a retirement community in Arizona. The emergency room where Sarah worked was located in a mid-sized city that served both urban and rural populations. The patient demographics were diverse, ranging from wealthy suburban families to migrant workers without insurance. Sarah treated everyone with the same level of care and respect, regardless of their ability to pay or their social status. This approach had earned her the loyalty of her patients, many of whom specifically requested her when they needed medical care. On this particular Friday night, as Sarah prepared to complete her documentation and head home, she reflected on the conversation she had overheard earlier in the doctor's lounge. Dr. Harrison and several other physicians had been discussing a new hospital policy that would require nurses to obtain additional certifications before they could participate in certain procedures. The tone of the conversation suggested that the doctors viewed this as a way to maintain control over medical decision-making, rather than as a means of improving patient care. The politics of healthcare frustrated Sarah immensely. She had witnessed countless situations where bureaucratic concerns took precedence over patient welfare, where insurance considerations influenced treatment decisions, and where the contributions of nurses were systematically minimized. Yet she persisted, driven by her commitment to the patients who depended on her expertise and compassion. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, Sarah noticed that her supervisor, Janet, was still at the nurse's station, looking unusually tense. Janet was normally calm and organized, but tonight she seemed distracted and kept glancing at her phone. When Sarah approached to ask if everything was all right, Janet simply said that they might be receiving some unusual patients over the weekend and that all staff should be prepared for anything. The vague warning was typical of the way information flowed in the hospital. Nurses were often kept in the dark about administrative decisions or special circumstances that might affect their work. They were expected to adapt and perform regardless of the challenges presented to them, yet they were rarely included in the planning process. Sarah had learned to read between the lines and to prepare for contingencies that others might not anticipate. Walking to her car in the hospital parking garage, Sarah thought about her mother's recent phone calls. Maria had seemed more nostalgic lately, sharing memories of her military service that she had previously kept private. She had mentioned serving in locations that required security clearances and working with people whose names she still couldn't reveal. Sarah had assumed these were the normal restrictions that applied to many military positions, but her mother's recent openness suggested that there might be more to the story. The drive home to Sarah's small apartment took her through the downtown area, past the federal building and the military recruitment office. The sight of the American flag illuminated against the night sky always reminded her of her mother's service and her own sense of duty to help others. Though her service was in healthcare rather than the military, Sarah felt that she was continuing a family tradition of putting others' needs before her own. Her apartment was sparse but comfortable, decorated with a few family photographs and mementos from her nursing career. Sarah had learned to appreciate simplicity, partly out of necessity due to her modest salary, and partly because her work schedule left little time for maintaining elaborate living spaces. She had invested in a comfortable bed and a good coffee maker, priorities that reflected her need for rest and caffeine to sustain her demanding schedule. Before settling in for the night, Sarah checked her email and found a message from her mother asking if they could talk over the weekend. The message was brief but seemed urgent, which was unusual for Maria, who typically scheduled their conversations well in advance. Sarah made a mental note to call her mother first thing in the morning, after she had gotten some sleep. As she prepared for bed, Sarah's mind wandered to the patients she had cared for that evening. There had been an elderly man with chest pain who reminded her of her grandfather, a young mother with a sick child who couldn't afford the recommended treatment, and a teenager who had been in a car accident and was terrified about telling his parents. Each patient had needed something different from her, and she had provided not just medical care but emotional support and advocacy within the healthcare system. The satisfaction Sarah derived from her work came not from recognition or financial reward, but from knowing that she had made a difference in people's lives during their most vulnerable moments. She had chosen nursing because it allowed her to combine her intellectual capabilities with her desire to serve others, and, despite the frustrations and challenges, she had never regretted that decision. Lying in bed, Sarah reflected on the irony of her situation. In a profession that required extensive education, continuous learning, and life-or-death decision-making, she was often dismissed as just a nurse. Yet she knew that her skills and knowledge were essential to the functioning of the healthcare system, and that patients often trusted her more than they trusted their doctors. The disconnect between her actual contributions and the respect she received from some colleagues was a constant source of frustration. The weekend ahead promised to be busy, with Sarah scheduled to work both Saturday and Sunday shifts. She had volunteered for the extra hours partly because she needed the money, and partly because she knew the hospital would be short-staffed. The summer months always brought an increase in trauma cases, and Sarah's experience made her a valuable asset during peak periods. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah had no idea that the upcoming weekend would change everything she thought she knew about her family, her profession, and her own identity. The quiet Friday night had been the calm before a storm that would reveal secrets buried for decades and challenge everything she believed about the value of being just a nurse. The morning sun streamed through her bedroom window as Sarah's alarm clock announced the start of what would become the most extraordinary weekend of her life. She rose, showered, and prepared for work with the same routine that had sustained her for years, unaware that forces beyond her comprehension were already moving pieces into place for events that would forever alter her understanding of her place in the world. Saturday morning arrived with an unusual buzz of activity at St. Mary's General Hospital. Sarah noticed it the moment she walked through the emergency room doors for her weekend shift. Janet, her supervisor, was in deep conversation with the hospital administrator, and several security guards were stationed at positions they normally didn't occupy. The atmosphere felt charged with anticipation, though nobody seemed willing to explain what was happening. Sarah's first clue that this would be no ordinary weekend came when she received her patient assignments. Instead of the typical mix of emergency cases, she was told to prepare for potential incoming trauma patients, but the details remained frustratingly vague. Dr. Harrison approached her station with an expression that was unusually serious, even for him. "Martinez, I need you to clear Trauma Bay 3 and prep it for a special patient," he said, his usual condescending tone replaced by something that sounded almost like respect. "We've received word that we may have incoming wounded from a classified situation. I'm told you have experience with military trauma protocols." Sarah was surprised by the comment. She had never mentioned her additional training in military trauma care, certification she had earned during her own brief stint with the National Guard Reserves. It was knowledge she had gained during summer training sessions, learning to treat battlefield injuries that she had hoped never to encounter in civilian practice. How Dr. Harrison knew about this training was puzzling, but she simply nodded and began preparing the trauma bay. As she worked, Sarah's phone rang. It was her mother, and Maria's voice carried an urgency that immediately caught Sarah's attention. "Mija, I need to tell you something important," Maria said without her usual pleasantries. "I've been watching the news, and there are reports of some kind of military operation that went wrong. I can't say much over the phone, but I need you to know that if certain people come to your hospital, you can trust them. They might ask for me, using my old call sign." "Mom, what are you talking about? What call sign?" Sarah asked, stepping into a supply closet for privacy. "Apache 7, Maria replied quietly. "If anyone mentions that name in connection with wounded coming to your facility, you need to know that these are good people, patriots who are protecting our country. I can't explain everything right now, but I'm driving up there. I should arrive tonight." The line went dead before Sarah could ask more questions. She stood in the supply closet, her mind racing with confusion and concern. Her mother had never spoken in such cryptic terms, and the mention of a military call sign suggested a level of service that went far beyond the communications role Maria had always claimed to have fulfilled. Returning to the emergency department, Sarah threw herself into preparation work, trying to process her mother's strange phone call while ensuring that Trauma Bay 3 was ready for whatever might come through the doors. She checked and double-checked the equipment, verified that blood supplies were adequate, and coordinated with the surgical team to ensure immediate availability of operating rooms. Around midday, the first hint of the extraordinary events unfolding came when a black sedan with government plates pulled up to the emergency entrance. Two men in dark suits emerged and spoke briefly with hospital security before disappearing into the administrative offices. Sarah caught only a glimpse of them, but their bearing and demeanor suggested federal agents or military intelligence officers. Dr. Harrison found Sarah again an hour later, this time accompanied by the hospital's chief of staff, Dr. Elizabeth Crawford. Dr. Crawford was a formidable woman who commanded respect throughout the medical community, and her presence signaled that whatever was happening involved the highest levels of hospital leadership. "Sarah," Dr. Crawford began, using her first name in a way that immediately indicated the gravity of the situation, "we've been informed that you have both medical training and security clearance that may be relevant to our current situation. Can you confirm your National Guard service and any specialized trauma training?" Sarah nodded, though she was increasingly confused about how these details of her background had become relevant. "Yes, ma'am. I served 6 years in the National Guard Reserves and completed advanced trauma protocols training. I also have a secret security clearance from that service, though it's been inactive for several years." Dr. Crawford exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Harrison before continuing. "That clearance has apparently been reactivated as of this morning. You're being temporarily assigned as lead trauma nurse for any classified patients we may receive. Federal agents will be coordinating with hospital security, and you'll be working directly with a military medical team that's en route." The situation was becoming more surreal by the moment. Sarah had entered the hospital that morning expecting a routine weekend shift, and now she was being told that her dormant military clearance had been reactivated and she was being assigned to handle classified patients. The convergence of her civilian and military background seemed too coincidental to be accidental. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah noticed increasing activity around the hospital. Additional security personnel arrived, some in hospital uniforms and others in civilian clothes that didn't quite conceal their military bearing. The emergency department was quietly cleared of non-essential personnel, and several trauma bays were cordoned off for special use. Around 4 o'clock, Sarah was approached by a woman in her 50s wearing the uniform of a colonel in the U.S. Army Medical Corps. The officer's name tag read Patterson, and her demeanor was professional but approachable. "Nurse Martinez, I'm Colonel Patterson, and I'll be coordinating medical care for the incoming wounded," the colonel said, extending her hand. "I understand you have both civilian trauma experience and military training. We may need both skill sets before this is over." Sarah shook the colonel's hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact that suggested both competence and authority. "Yes, ma'am. Can you tell me what we're dealing with? The information I've received has been pretty vague." Colonel Patterson glanced around to ensure privacy before responding. "There was an operation involving classified personnel that encountered unexpected complications. We have multiple wounded who require immediate medical attention, but their identities and the nature of their mission cannot be disclosed to most of the hospital staff. You've been cleared to know that these are American service members who are conducting authorized operations in defense of national security." The explanation raised more questions than it answered, but Sarah understood that military operations often involved layers of classification and need-to-know restrictions. She had learned during her Guard service that sometimes you had to trust the system and focus on your specific role rather than demanding complete information. As evening approached, Sarah received another call from her mother. This time, Maria's voice was even more urgent. "Mija, I'm about an hour away from the hospital. When I arrive, I need you to meet me at the main entrance. There are things you need to know before the wounded arrive. Your father's death wasn't what I told you, and my military service involved operations that are still classified. I should have told you years ago, but I was protecting you." Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Her father had supposedly died in a construction accident when she was very young, and she had only the vaguest memories of him. The suggestion that his death was somehow connected to classified military operations was overwhelming. "Mom, you're scaring me. What are you talking about? What operations?" "I can't say more on the phone, but your father was Apache 6, and I was Apache 7. We worked together on missions that the government still can't acknowledge. He died protecting assets that are connected to the wounded coming to your hospital tonight. I'm coming because they'll need someone they can trust, and because it's time you learned the truth about your family." The call ended, leaving Sarah stunned and struggling to process the implications of her mother's revelations. The mysterious references to Apache call signs, classified operations, and her father's death created a picture that contradicted everything she had believed about her family history. Dr. Harrison approached Sarah's station again, this time with news that multiple ambulances were en route with wounded from what he described as a classified incident. The patients would require immediate trauma care, and Sarah was designated as the primary nurse for the most critically injured. "Martinez, I have to admit that I've underestimated you," Dr. Harrison said, his tone carrying a humility she had never heard before. "The federal agents made it clear that your background and clearance make you uniquely qualified for this situation. I apologize for any previous comments that suggested otherwise." Sarah appreciated the apology, though her mind was focused on preparing for the incoming patients. She had learned to compartmentalize personal concerns when medical emergencies required her full attention, a skill that would be essential in the coming hours. At 8 o'clock, the first ambulance arrived with military markings and an escort of federal vehicles. Sarah watched from the trauma bay windows as heavily armed personnel secured the area while medical teams prepared to transfer the wounded. The level of security and coordination suggested that whatever operation had gone wrong involved high-value targets or sensitive intelligence. The first patient was a man in his 30s with multiple gunshot wounds and severe blood loss. As Sarah began coordinating his care, she noticed a tattoo on his forearm that looked familiar. It was an Apache helicopter symbol with the number 6 beneath it, identical to a piece of jewelry her mother had worn for as long as Sarah could remember. Working alongside Colonel Patterson and the military medical team, Sarah found herself drawing on both her civilian trauma experience and her military training. The wounded men and women were clearly special operations personnel, with physical conditioning and tactical gear that indicated elite status. Their injuries were consistent with a firefight involving automatic weapons and explosive devices. As Sarah worked to stabilize the first patient, he regained consciousness briefly and grabbed her arm with surprising strength. His eyes were intense but unfocused from blood loss and medication. "Apache 7, he whispered urgently. "Need to find Apache 7. Mission compromised. Package secured but team scattered." Sarah's blood ran cold. Apache 7 was the call sign her mother had mentioned, and this wounded soldier was specifically asking for her. The implications were staggering, suggesting that her mother's mysterious military background was directly connected to whatever classified operation had gone wrong. Colonel Patterson overheard the soldier's words and looked sharply at Sarah. "Did he just ask for Apache 7? That call sign belongs to someone who's been off active duty for over 20 years. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's my mother's old call sign. She's en route to the hospital now." The colonel's expression shifted to one of surprised recognition. "Your mother is Maria Martinez, Apache 7? Then, you're..." She paused, apparently making connections that Sarah couldn't follow. "This explains a lot about how you were selected for this assignment. Your mother's reputation in special operations circles is legendary." Before Sarah could ask what that meant, her mother appeared at the trauma bay entrance, somehow having bypassed all the security measures that should have prevented civilian access to the restricted area. Maria was wearing clothes that Sarah had never seen before: tactical pants, combat boots, and a jacket that concealed what appeared to be body armor. This was not the retiring woman Sarah knew, but someone who moved with the confidence and authority of a military professional. "Apache 7 reporting," Maria announced to Colonel Patterson with a crisp salute that the colonel returned with obvious respect. "I understand you have wounded from Operation Nightfall. What's their status?" Sarah stared at her mother in shock, watching as Maria transformed from a mild-mannered retiree into someone who clearly commanded respect from active military personnel. The evening had already shattered many of Sarah's assumptions about her life, but seeing her mother's professional demeanor in this context was perhaps the most disorienting revelation yet. Colonel Patterson's salute to Maria Martinez was crisp and immediate, the kind of respectful gesture reserved for legends within military special operations. Sarah watched in amazement as her mother shed the persona of a quiet retiree and assumed the bearing of someone accustomed to command authority in the most dangerous situations imaginable. "Apache 7, it's an honor to meet you," Colonel Patterson said with genuine reverence. "Your operations in Central America and the Middle East are still studied in advanced tactical courses. We have 7 wounded from Operation Nightfall, with 2 in critical condition. The mission was compromised, but they secured the intelligence package before extraction became necessary. Maria nodded, her eyes quickly scanning the trauma bay to assess the wounded soldiers. What's the nature of their injuries, and what's the security status of the intelligence they recovered? Multiple gunshot wounds, fragmentation injuries from improvised explosive devices, and one case of possible chemical exposure, Colonel Patterson replied. The intelligence package is secure but requires immediate analysis. The team leader is conscious and asking for you specifically. Sarah continued working on the wounded soldier while listening to this exchange between her mother and the colonel. The revelation that her mother was not only known to active military personnel but apparently held in high regard was staggering. The woman who had raised her as a single mother, working mundane jobs to pay for Sarah's education, was apparently a legendary figure in special operations circles. Maria approached the patient Sarah was treating, and the wounded soldier's eyes immediately focused with recognition despite his injuries and medication. Apache 7, thank God you're here, he whispered. The package contains intelligence about a planned attack on American soil. We recovered it from the cell that killed Apache 6 20 years ago. They've been planning this since then, waiting for the right moment to strike. Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis. The wounded soldier was talking about her father, confirming that his death had not been the construction accident her mother had always described. Apache 6 had been killed in action during a classified operation, and now, 2 decades later, the same terrorist cell was planning an attack on American soil. Maria's expression remained professional, but Sarah caught a flash of pain in her mother's eyes at the mention of Apache 6. How current is the intelligence, Sergeant? Less than 48 hours old, ma'am. They're planning to hit multiple targets simultaneously, including federal buildings and hospitals. The timeline suggests execution within the next 72 hours. We also recovered documents indicating they have inside information about government response protocols. Colonel Patterson stepped closer to the patient. Sergeant, do you have any indication of how they obtained classified information about our response protocols? The wounded soldier's voice was growing weaker, but his message was clear. There's a mole, ma'am. Someone high up in either military intelligence or federal law enforcement. The documents we recovered show detailed knowledge of our counterterrorism procedures and personnel assignments. Sarah felt the implications of this revelation settling over the room like a heavy blanket. Not only was there an imminent terrorist threat against American targets, but the enemy had infiltrated the very agencies responsible for preventing such attacks. The wounded soldiers lying in the trauma bay had risked their lives to uncover a plot that could result in massive casualties if not stopped. Maria turned to Colonel Patterson with an expression that combined professional assessment with personal determination. Colonel, we need to establish a secure communication channel with the Pentagon and brief them on this intelligence immediately. We also need to assume that standard communication protocols may be compromised. Agreed, Apache 7. I've already initiated secure communications with Joint Special Operations Command, but we need to verify the intelligence before activating full response protocols. Can your team leader provide additional details about the planned attacks? Sarah watched as her mother moved with practiced efficiency between the wounded soldiers, gathering information while coordinating with the military medical team. It was clear that Maria possessed knowledge and experience that went far beyond anything Sarah had imagined. The gentle woman who had made her breakfast every morning during high school was simultaneously a hardened operative capable of functioning at the highest levels of national security. The second critically wounded patient was a woman in her 20s with severe abdominal injuries from an explosive device. As Sarah began working to stabilize her condition, the young soldier grabbed Sarah's hand with desperate strength. Are you Apache 7's daughter? The soldier asked, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment. Yes, I'm Sarah Martinez. How did you know? Your mother talked about you during our training exercises. She said you became a nurse because you wanted to save lives the way she saved lives in operations. She's proud of you, more than you know. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, not just from the emotional revelation but from the realization that her mother had been involved in training active special operations personnel. The scope of Maria's continued involvement in classified activities was becoming apparent, suggesting that her retirement had been more of a cover story than a reality. Dr. Harrison approached Sarah's station with news that additional wounded were arriving, along with federal agents who needed to debrief the survivors about the intelligence they had recovered. The emergency department was being transformed into a command center for what appeared to be a major counterterrorism operation. "Martinez, the federal agents want to speak with you and your mother about the intelligence package," Dr. Harrison said. "Apparently, your security clearance and family connections make you essential to their analysis of the threat." Sarah nodded, though she was still struggling to understand how her role as a nurse had become intertwined with national security concerns. The convergence of her professional skills and her family's classified background seemed too convenient to be coincidental, raising questions about whether her assignment to this situation had been carefully orchestrated. As Sarah and Maria joined the federal agents in a secure conference room that had been hastily established in the hospital administrative offices, Sarah finally had an opportunity to confront her mother about the deceptions that had shaped her entire life. "Mom, I need to know the truth about everything. Who was my father really? What was your actual role in the military? And why am I just learning about all of this now?" Maria's expression softened as she looked at her daughter, the professional mask slipping to reveal the mother who had sacrificed so much to provide Sarah with a normal childhood. "Your father, Miguel Martinez, was Apache 6, the team leader for one of the military's most classified special operations units. We worked together for 5 years, conducting missions in Central America, the Middle East, and other locations I still can't discuss. We fell in love during a mission in Honduras, and when I became pregnant with you, we decided to get married and try to build a normal life together." Sarah listened intently, finally hearing the truth about her family's history that had been hidden for her entire life. Miguel was killed during a mission to capture a terrorist cell leader who had been planning attacks against American embassies. The mission was successful, but Miguel died protecting intelligence that prevented hundreds of deaths. "I told you he died in a construction accident because I wanted you to have a normal childhood, free from the burden of knowing that your father died as a national hero." The weight of this revelation was overwhelming. Sarah had grown up believing her father was a construction worker who had died in an industrial accident, never knowing that he had sacrificed his life to protect American lives overseas. "After Miguel's death, I was offered a desk job at the Pentagon, but I chose to retire from active duty and focus on raising you," Maria continued. "However, I remained on call for consultations and training exercises, which is why I was familiar with the soldiers who were wounded tonight. The terrorist cell that killed your father has been dormant for 20 years, but recent intelligence suggested they were preparing to activate." The federal agents in the room exchanged meaningful looks before one of them, a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Agent Rebecca Chen, spoke directly to Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, your unique combination of medical training, security clearance, and family connections to this operation makes you invaluable to our current situation. The wounded soldiers trust you and your mother, and we need that trust to extract every piece of intelligence possible about the planned attacks." Sarah was beginning to understand that her role in this situation extended far beyond providing medical care. She was being asked to serve as a bridge between the wounded soldiers and the intelligence agencies attempting to prevent a terrorist attack. Agent Chen continued, "The intelligence recovered by the team indicates that the attacks are planned for Monday morning, targeting federal buildings in 3 major cities, as well as several hospitals that serve government personnel. Your hospital is actually one of the targets, which explains why the enemy may have inside information about security protocols here." The revelation that St. Mary's General Hospital was a target sent chills through Sarah's body. She had been working in a facility that terrorists planned to attack, caring for patients who would become casualties if the plot succeeded. "What do you need me to do?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the fear and confusion she felt. "We need you to continue caring for the wounded soldiers while helping us extract every detail they can remember about the intelligence they recovered," Agent Chen replied. "Your medical training allows you to monitor their conditions while your clearance allows you to hear classified information. Your mother will be working with military intelligence to analyze the documents and coordinate the response." Maria placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, her touch conveying both pride and concern for her daughter's safety. "Mija, I know this is overwhelming, but you have skills and qualities that make you perfect for this situation. You're strong, intelligent, and dedicated to helping others, just like your father was. If you're willing to help, we can prevent the attacks and honor your father's sacrifice at the same time." Sarah looked around the room at the federal agents, military officers, and her mother, all of whom were waiting for her decision. The weekend that had begun with routine nursing duties had evolved into a situation where her choices could impact national security and save countless lives. "I'll do whatever is necessary to help prevent these attacks," Sarah said without hesitation. "But I want to know everything about my father's mission and how it connects to what's happening now." Agent Chen nodded approvingly. "Your father's team was investigating a terrorist network that had been planning long-term attacks against American targets. They successfully disrupted the immediate threat, but the network leadership escaped and has been rebuilding for 20 years. The intelligence your team recovered tonight contains the complete operational plan for their revenge attack, including targets, timing, and methods." The scope of the threat was becoming clear to Sarah. The terrorists hadn't simply been planning random attacks, they had been working for 2 decades to develop a comprehensive assault that would maximize casualties and demonstrate their ability to strike at the heart of American security. The attacks are designed to overwhelm emergency response systems by hitting multiple targets simultaneously, Agent Chen explained. Federal buildings, hospitals, transportation hubs, and military facilities in Washington, New York, and Los Angeles. The goal is to create chaos and fear while demonstrating that they can strike anywhere at any time. Sarah's nursing training kicked in as she considered the medical implications of such attacks. Hospitals would be both targets and essential resources for treating casualties from other locations. The strategic thinking behind targeting medical facilities revealed a sophisticated understanding of how to maximize the psychological and practical impact of terrorist attacks. "How much time do we have to prevent this?" Sarah asked. "Based on the intelligence timeline, approximately 60 hours, Agent Chen replied. "That's enough time to coordinate a response if we can extract all the details from the wounded soldiers and verify the accuracy of the documents they recovered." Sarah realized that her medical skills would be crucial not just for treating the wounded soldiers, but for keeping them stable enough to provide the information necessary to prevent a catastrophic attack. The intersection of her professional and personal life had created a situation where her unique capabilities were essential to national security. The next 60 hours passed in a blur of intense activity that transformed St. Mary's General Hospital into the nerve center of a massive counterterrorism operation. Sarah found herself working alongside federal agents, military intelligence officers, and special operations personnel, using her medical training to keep the wounded soldiers stable while extracting crucial information about the planned attacks. Working in 12-hour shifts, Sarah carefully monitored each patient's condition while debriefing them about the intelligence they had recovered. The information painted a terrifying picture of a coordinated assault designed to cause maximum casualties and psychological trauma across 3 major American cities. The terrorists had spent 20 years planning their revenge for the mission that had killed their original leadership, including Sarah's father. Maria worked tirelessly with military analysts, translating documents written in multiple languages and identifying key figures in the terrorist network. Her expertise in special operations and intimate knowledge of the original mission proved invaluable in understanding the connections between past and present threats. Sarah watched her mother work with a combination of pride and amazement, finally, seeing the woman who had shaped her own sense of duty and service to others. The breakthrough came on Sunday evening when Sarah was treating the team's communications specialist, a young man named Corporal James Wilson. While checking his bandages, Sarah noticed that he was struggling to remember important details about the mission due to a head injury sustained during their escape. "Corporal, I know this is difficult, but can you walk me through the timeline again?" Sarah asked gently, using the patient rapport skills that had made her an exceptional nurse. "Start with when you first identified the terrorist communications." Wilson's eyes focused as Sarah spoke, responding to her calm, professional demeanor in a way that the federal agents' more aggressive questioning had failed to achieve. "They were using a frequency that matched patterns from operations 20 years ago," Wilson said slowly. "The same encryption methods, the same call signs, even the same timing protocols. It was like they had frozen their procedures since Apache 6 mission and were just waiting for the right moment to activate them. This revelation provided the key insight that military intelligence needed to trace the terrorist communications in real time. Within hours, the National Security Agency had identified the current locations of the terrorist cells and begun coordinating with local law enforcement agencies to prevent the attacks. As Monday morning approached, Sarah received updates on the progress of the counter-terrorism operation. FBI and local SWAT teams had successfully raided terrorist safe houses in Washington, New York, and Los Angeles, capturing most of the operatives and securing explosive devices that would have caused devastating casualties. The intelligence provided by the wounded soldiers had been accurate and complete, allowing authorities to prevent what could have been one of the most destructive terrorist attacks in American history. The success of the operation, however, came with a personal cost that Sarah hadn't anticipated. During the final debriefing session on Monday afternoon, Agent Chen informed Sarah and Maria that the mole within the government had been identified and arrested. The revelation of the mole's identity sent shockwaves through the intelligence community and had implications that extended far beyond the immediate terrorist threat. The mole was Deputy Director Marcus Sullivan of the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, Agent Chen announced to the assembled team. He had been providing information to the terrorist network for over 15 years, including details about Apache 6's mission that allowed them to plan their ambush. Sarah felt a surge of anger as she realized that her father's death had been facilitated by betrayal from within the American intelligence community. The mole's actions had not only led to Miguel Martinez's death but had enabled the terrorist network to plan their revenge attack with insider knowledge of government procedures. Maria's reaction was more controlled but equally intense. Sullivan was involved in the briefings for Miguel's mission. He knew the operational details, the timeline, and the extraction procedures. His betrayal didn't just kill my husband, it compromised every operation he had access to over the past 15 years. The scope of Sullivan's treachery was staggering, potentially affecting hundreds of operations and putting countless American personnel at risk. His arrest would require a comprehensive review of every mission he had been involved with, a process that could take years to complete. As the immediate crisis passed and the hospital began returning to normal operations, Sarah found herself reflecting on the extraordinary weekend that had changed her understanding of everything she thought she knew about her life. The revelation of her family's true history, her mother's legendary status in special operations circles, and her own unexpected role in preventing a terrorist attack had fundamentally altered her perspective on her profession and her place in the world. Dr. Harrison approached Sarah on Monday evening as she prepared to complete her shift documentation. His demeanor had changed completely from the condescending attitude he had displayed just days earlier. "Sarah, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what I said on Friday," he began. "I've learned more about your background and capabilities in the past 3 days than I had in the previous 2 years of working together. Your combination of medical expertise, military training, and operational security experience is extraordinary." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but her perspective on workplace hierarchy had evolved beyond seeking validation from colleagues who had underestimated her contributions. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison, but I think what's most important is that we all remember that every member of our team brings unique skills and experiences that can be valuable in ways we might not expect," Sarah replied diplomatically. The hospital administrator, Dr. Crawford, joined the conversation with news that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. "Sarah, I've received a formal commendation from the Pentagon acknowledging your role in preventing the terrorist attacks," Dr. Crawford announced. "They've also offered you a position as a liaison between military medical units and civilian hospitals, which would involve training exercises and emergency preparedness planning." The offer represented a dramatic career opportunity that would combine Sarah's civilian nursing experience with her military background in ways she had never imagined possible. The position would allow her to help prepare other hospitals for emergency situations while maintaining her commitment to patient care. "I'm honored by the offer, but I need some time to consider it," Sarah replied. "This weekend has shown me that I have capabilities I didn't know existed, but I also want to make sure I'm making decisions for the right reasons." Maria joined the group, having completed her final briefing with military intelligence. Her expression conveyed both exhaustion and satisfaction at having helped prevent a catastrophic attack while finally sharing the truth about her family's history with her daughter. Mija, whatever you decide about your career, I want you to know how proud I am of you, Maria said. You handled this situation with the same courage and dedication that your father showed in his final mission. He would be proud to see how you've grown into someone who serves others with such commitment. Sarah felt tears welling up as she considered the journey that had brought her to this moment. The weekend had begun with her feeling undervalued and dismissed as just a nurse, but it had ended with her playing a crucial role in preventing a terrorist attack and earning recognition from the highest levels of the military and intelligence communities. The irony was not lost on her that the same profession that colleagues had belittled had provided her with the skills necessary to contribute to a national security operation. Her ability to establish trust with patients, to remain calm under pressure, and to coordinate complex care plans had proven invaluable in extracting intelligence from wounded soldiers and supporting the counter-terrorism effort. As Sarah prepared to leave the hospital that evening, she paused to visit each of the wounded soldiers who were still recovering from their injuries. Their gratitude for her care and their respect for her family's service had provided her with a new understanding of the value of her chosen profession. Corporal Wilson, whose head injury had initially prevented him from remembering crucial details, had made a remarkable recovery under Sarah's care. As she checked his bandages one final time, he shared a perspective that would stay with her for the rest of her career. "Ma'am, I've been treated by military medics and doctors all over the world, but I've never had a nurse who could combine medical expertise with operational understanding the way you did," Wilson said. "You saved our lives medically, but you also saved our mission by helping us remember the details we needed to share. That's something special." The wounded female soldier, Sergeant Lisa Torres, had undergone successful surgery to repair her abdominal injuries and was expected to make a full recovery. Her assessment of Sarah's role was equally meaningful. "Your mother told us during training that the most important quality of a special operator isn't physical strength or weapons expertise, but the ability to adapt and perform under unexpected circumstances," Torres said. "You demonstrated that same quality this weekend, using skills you probably never expected to need in a civilian hospital." These conversations helped Sarah understand that her weekend experience had not been an aberration but a revelation of capabilities that had always existed within her chosen profession. The intersection of medical training, military background, and personal dedication had created a unique skill set that could serve others in ways she was only beginning to understand. As Sarah drove home Monday night, she reflected on the phone call she needed to make to accept or decline the Pentagon's job offer. The position would provide new challenges and opportunities while allowing her to honor her father's memory by contributing to national security. It would also enable her to help other healthcare professionals prepare for emergency situations that might require the same combination of medical and operational skills she had discovered within herself. The decision ultimately came down to her core motivation for becoming a nurse in the first place: the desire to help others during their most vulnerable moments. Whether those moments occurred in a routine emergency room or during a classified counter-terrorism operation, the fundamental calling remained the same. Sarah realized that her weekend experience had not changed who she was but had revealed who she had always been. The daughter of Apache 6 and Apache 7, raised by a single mother who had sacrificed a military career to provide her with opportunities for education and growth. A nurse who had chosen her profession out of a desire to serve others, discovering that service could take forms she had never imagined. The following morning, Sarah called Dr. Crawford to accept the Pentagon position, with the condition that she could maintain her role at St. Mary's on a part-time basis. The compromise would allow her to continue caring for civilian patients while developing programs to prepare other hospitals for emergency situations that might require specialized skills. The announcement of Sarah's new role sent ripples through the hospital staff, fundamentally changing how her colleagues viewed both her capabilities and the nursing profession in general. Dr. Harrison, in particular, became an advocate for recognizing the advanced training and expertise that many nurses brought to their positions. 6 months later, Sarah found herself conducting training exercises at hospitals across the country, teaching healthcare professionals how to respond to mass casualty events, terrorist attacks, and other scenarios that required integration of civilian and military medical protocols. Her programs became models for emergency preparedness, combining her nursing expertise with her operational security background. The respect she earned from military personnel, federal agents, and hospital administrators had less to do with her family connections than with her demonstrated ability to perform under pressure while maintaining the compassion and professionalism that define excellent nursing care. Looking back on that extraordinary weekend, Sarah understood that the phrase "just a nurse" had never accurately described her or any of her colleagues. Nursing required intelligence, adaptability, courage, and dedication that could serve others in ways that extended far beyond traditional medical settings. Her story became a reminder that every profession contains individuals whose capabilities extend beyond conventional expectations, waiting for circumstances that allow their full potential to be revealed. The secret Apache helicopter that had arrived that weekend carrying wounded soldiers had brought more than medical emergencies to St. Mary's Hospital. It had delivered an opportunity for Sarah to discover the intersection of her family legacy, her professional calling, and her personal capacity to serve others in extraordinary circumstances. The experience proved that being just a nurse was actually being everything her patients and her country needed her to be.